Welcome to the Flourish Frequency, the show where we activate and amplify the frequencies of success, joy, and abundance. I'm your host, Beth Larsen, a high-performance and quantum success coach. If you're ready to ditch the hard hustle and embrace a more effortless flow, then this is the show for you. Together, we'll tap into quantum thinking, harness the laws of the universe, and unlock the secrets to living a life of more. More joy, more energy, more passion, more money, and more meaning. No more simply surviving, we're going beyond thriving. It's time to flourish. The Flourish Frequency Show starts now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to 2026. We're a good couple weeks in here already. And more importantly, welcome to you version 2.026. I did an episode last year just about this time called You version 2.025. And I was thinking about it this morning and realizing this is probably going to be an annual episode because this is a theme that really embodies part of my own ethos, what I believe in so strongly, that we are here not to reinvent ourselves every year, but to evolve ourselves. And that distinction really matters because reinvention implies that something is broken, whereas evolution implies that something is alive. Now, this episode was actually inspired by my iPhone. I am an Apple girl through and through. Got my iPhone, my iPad, my MacBook, and every few weeks or so, there's an update. Sometimes an update is there to fix a bug. Sometimes it introduces a new feature. Sometimes it's just a small refinement that you barely notice until something just seems to be working a little bit better. And every so often, there's a full operating system upgrade. What I love about this model is that evolution is actually expected. Refinement is completely normal, and optimization is ongoing. There's no shame in needing an update. There's no self-judgment. There's no drama. It's just simply part of the design. Now, that way of thinking, that growth that happens through vision, development, release, iteration, it's always been at the heart of Apple. And I think we can all agree that Apple is one of the most successful companies in the world. And it's a philosophy that really traces back to Steve Jobs. And it continues to shape how Apple creates today. And I personally think we can learn a lot from that model because it shows us that meaningful growth doesn't start with having everything figured out. It just starts with having a clear sense of what wants to exist, what wants to actually be expressed, what wants to come through you. And I say it that vision comes first, but sometimes it's not an actual vision. Sometimes it's just that desire, that impulse, that knowing that something is wanting to come through, and you don't know what it is yet. But that vision, that impulse, that desire, that's what comes first. Action follows it, often imperfectly. Once you take the action, then comes feedback, then adjustment, refinement, not all at once, but over time. And instead of asking, how do I get this right? Or how do I do this right? Or worse, why am I doing what's wrong? Implying that there is something wrong. A more expansive question that comes through this process is, what's the next version that's ready to be expressed? That's what we're exploring here today in this episode. We're going to be talking about you version 2.026, not as a future destination, but as a living, evolving process. We're going to explore what it means to lead with vision before knowing how. Why launch and evolve is one of the most authentic ways to grow. And how releasing those past versions of yourself creates space for something even bigger and better to come through. Because your life doesn't change when you try harder. It changes when your internal operating system updates. So before we dive in, I'm just going to invite you to take a gentle breath with me here. Whatever you're doing today, wherever you are, if you're listening to this live with me, if you're driving your car, or if you're listening to this later on the replay, just take a moment, take a breath, and let's dive in for this conversation and just let this land. I'm going to be giving you some prompts throughout this episode here today. And you can always pause it and come back to it later. But I really want to invite you to really explore what this conversation means for you. So, one of the most misunderstood parts of creation is this idea that you need to know how before you move. The fact of the matter is that you don't. We have been conditioned to believe that clarity is something that you earn after enough thinking. But vision, it doesn't arise that way. Vision arrives as an impression, a pull, a quiet knowing. I mentioned before that desire, that impulse. You know that there's something. If you wait to understand everything you move, or if you wait to have perfect clarity on it, you often miss the moment where evolution is actually asking you to just say yes to it. You know, one of the reasons that Steve Jobs was such a powerful creator wasn't because he knew how to engineer products, because he didn't. He was not an engineer. He wasn't a coder. His genius, it was vision. There's a moment early in the development of the iPod, and I love this story. Steve Jobs was in a room with his team, engineers and designers and people who were deep into the technical weeds. They were doing what teams will often do at the beginning of a project. They were talking about storage, battery life, hardware limitations, file compression. They were speaking in specs. And Steve was listening for a while, and then he stopped them. Not because the details didn't matter, but because they weren't the starting point. He didn't say to the team, here's the roadmap. He didn't say, here's exactly how we're going to build this. Instead, he offered a simple sentence. I want 1,000 songs in your pocket. I get chills every time I say that. That's it. That was what he said to the team. No explanation, no fancy PowerPoint, no certainty about how that was even possible with the technology at the time. He just had a clear, embodied vision of the experience that he wanted for people. And the team looked at him a little bit as like a little crazy, because these were guys and girls and women that were meant to think from the logical perspective. So their first thought was just a little bit, well, how's that going to happen? But here's what matters most here. At that moment, while no one in the room knew how to do that, the storage did not exist in a consumer-friendly way. The interface had yet to be designed, and the constraints, they were real. They were valid questions that his team was asking. But the vision didn't wait for permission from the logistics. The vision came first. And once it was spoken, something shifted in the room, and Steve held that for the team. He held the vision. And here's what happened. Here's what emerged out of it. The engineers now had an orientation. The designers had a North Star to move towards. Now the team wasn't building just a device, they were building an experience. The how came later, and it came through iteration, through testing, through collaboration, through refinement. But without that initial vision, clear, simple, emotionally resonant, without that vision and that feeling behind it too, the experiential feeling, none of the technical brilliance would have ever mattered. There's another story that illustrates the same truth, just on a much larger scale. It comes from the early days of the US space program, from Wernher von Braun, one of the leading rocket scientists behind the Apollo missions. In the late 1950s and the early 1960s, the idea of putting a human being on the moon, it wasn't just an ambitious idea, it actually bordered on the impossible. because technology did not exist to be able to do that. And the materials hadn't even been invented yet. The calculations on how to make it all happen were incomplete. Engineers at this point in time, they were still figuring out how to get a rocket safely out of the Earth's atmosphere, let alone land on the moon and bring somebody home. And yet the vision was already alive. In 1961, John F. Kennedy publicly declared the goal of putting a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth within the decade. What's important to understand here is this. When that vision was announced, no one fully knew how to do it yet, including von Braun. Later in interviews, von Braun would reflect that when the leaders asked him what it would actually take to make the moon mission possible, his answer wasn't primarily technical. The technology he knew could be developed. The systems could be designed. All the problems along the way, they would get solved. What was required first, and what he told them, was the will to do it. Take that in, the will to do it. Once that will existed, so you have vision and you have will, once that existed, clearly and collectively and publicly, everything else reorganized around it. The funding followed. The research accelerated. Collaborations happened that allowed it to come into fruition. And the question stopped being, is this possible? And instead became, how do we make this inevitable? The vision itself and the will is what created the gravity. The how, it finally had something to orient towards. And then step by step, through experimentation, through failure, through iteration and refinement, the full path ahead revealed itself. But the important thing here is no one was waiting for the certainty. They moved with commitment before clarity. And this is the part that I want you to hear. The moon landing didn't happen because they had confidence. It happened because they had devotion to a vision that didn't yet have proof. So whether it's a device that that changes how we carry music, or it's a declaration that changes humanity's relationship to the entire cosmos, creation itself follows the same order. Vision first, then movement, then refinement. Vision is not a plan, it's an orientation. Often what we call needing clarity, it's actually your nervous system that's asking for safety, right? I hear this a lot of times with clients, like they're looking for clarity. It's not the clarity that you're looking for. You actually know what you want somewhere within you. Either you're choosing not to acknowledge it, or you're stuck in the not knowing how. So the nervous system is asking for safety. It's asking for the certainty. And certainty feels safer than trust, than faith. But evolution does not move at the speed of comfort. It moves at the speed of truth and at the speed of faith. So I want to invite you right now here to think about a few questions. And you can pause this and come back to it later. You can grab your journal and take some time to really journal through this. But where in your life do you already sense a vision? But maybe you keep postponing action because you don't know how it's going to work. Where are you being asked to trust before you fully understand? And this is a big one. If you allowed yourself to lead with vision, instead of certainty? What would shift in how you move? And what's one small action that you could take that honors the vision without needing to know the whole plan? So take some time with those questions. I'm going to invite you to actually approach those questions from a place of curiosity. These are not questions that you want to move into your logical left brain trying to figure it out. These aren't problems to solve. These are things to get curious about. And curiosity is very much a right brain function. So if you approach these questions with curiosity, it's going to open up more of the path forward for you. It's going to allow you to take that vision and actually start to create some momentum behind it. Once vision is allowed to lead, something shifts. You stop waiting for everything to be perfect. And you start moving with what you do know, with what you do have available to you to be able to take some action forward. So in a moment here, we're going to take a short break. And if this conversation is resonating for you, if something inside of you is recognizing itself as I talk about vision and trust and moving with certainty, I want you to know that you don't have to hold that awareness alone. I have a monthly membership. It's called the Flourish Alchemy membership. And it's a space for women who are learning how to trust what they sense before they fully understand it. It's a space where vision is honored, not rushed. And it's where your evolution is supported. You'll be able to find more details here about the Flourish Alchemy membership in the show notes. When we come back, we're going to talk about what happens next. Why launch and evolve is actually something that creates momentum. It's part of that Apple model that we're talking about here. And how growth responds not to certainty, but to participation. So we'll be right back.
Cut the shit. Stop struggling to feel present. Stop being taken advantage of. Express how you feel and stop making choices based on what other people think. Intuition Unleashed, a revolution in personal liberation podcast, is your go-to resource for combining guidance with mental health and spirituality and solving your questions about why you can't seem to catch a break and find your true happiness. And you can find more episodes at becknelson.com/podcast.
Tune in to the Goddess Emergence Show the first and third Wednesday of each month at 2 p.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio with Dr. Bree Gibbs, a spiritual leader, healer, and trance medium who, alongside of Goddess Bell, the creator, and other masters, will share information never before released on the planet. Embark on a spiritual pathway to address your physical health, emotional frequency, mental clarity, and spiritual well-being, all in perfect harmony. Visit drbreegibbs.com.
Are you struggling with unresolved emotions or recurring patterns? Tune into Beyond Birth Trauma, From Burden to Brilliance with me, Shannon O'Flaherty, on Transformation Talk Radio. On the second Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific Time, we'll explore your own birth experiences and consider how they might be affecting your current life patterns to start your journey towards self-discovery and healing. For more information, visit shannonbtb.com. That's shannonbtb.com.
We are all born with gifts that we are meant to use to improve the world. Join me, Vicki Todd, and Dr. Pat on Shine Delusion Shine, the radical art of dreaming beyond boundaries, each fourth Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio. Shine Delusion Shine is a springboard to believing, dreaming, and thinking beyond the ordinary and a catalyst to living a more fulfilling, destiny-driven life. For more information, visit vickiworldart.com.
All right, welcome back. So, if you're just joining us, today we're talking about you, version 2.026. Not as something that you have to become, but this is a process that you're already involved in. Before the break, we explored the idea that vision comes before the how, that you don't need certainty to honor what's calling you. You just need enough trust and faith in order to take the next step. We looked at how meaningful creation, from Steve Jobs and the iPod to humanity's journey to the moon, it's always begun with a clear sense of what wants to exist, long before those mechanics were all figured out. And now what I want to do is move into what happens next, what it looks like to participate in your own evolution, why momentum is actually created through movement, and how launch and evolve becomes a more honest way to grow than just waiting to be ready. When you look at Apple and how they actually create, there's a pattern that shows up over and over and over again. They don't wait for a product to be perfect before releasing it. Instead, they release a version. That version comes out and it meets the real world. It gets used, it gets feedback, and then it evolves. This isn't a flaw in their system. It actually is the system. Refinement, it doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in relationship with reality. It happens when people are actually using the products to be able to give the feedback. That's how the refinement is able to occur. Because here's the thing, you can't improve what never gets expressed. You can't refine something that never leaves your head. And this way of creating, for me, it's always made sense to me. It actually mirrors a little bit how I'm wired. I actually, in my human design, for anybody out there who's familiar with human design, part of my profile includes what's called a line 3. So I have a 3-5 profile. That line 3 is an energy. Excuse me. It's an energy that's all about experimentation. They call it kind of the trial and error and energy. I prefer to think of it as trial and iterate, trial and refine. It's trying things out and engaging with life directly. It's learning by interacting with reality instead of just thinking about it. For me, I don't choose to see this as something that's wrong with me or that I'm doing something wrong. Instead, I use it as permission to play, permission to explore, to experiment, permission to move without demanding that every single step is permanent, because it's not. I don't need to have a path that's carved in stone in order to begin. For me, I just need a direction. And then I let the path reveal itself through experience. Some people would call much of what I've done a failure at times. For me, I choose to see it as information. I always think here too of like Edison, I think it was Edison. It's the famous saying that he didn't fail 1,000 times. He found 1,000 ways not to create the light bulb, right? It wasn't 1,000 failures. It was 1,000 experiments, 1,000 opportunities to get feedback. He still had the vision of where he was going. But without all of those opportunities and the feedback that came from it, there would be no reiteration. We wouldn't have light bulbs today. One of the most powerful examples for myself in my business came through something that many would consider a failure. There was a example of a program that I actually had created. It was something that it actually was how do I want to say this? It was a program that I already had. It was part of my high performance coaching that I was doing. And a friend of mine was working for a company that was going out of business. And so she had called me and we were talking, and she was asking me about the coaching that I was doing and the different modules and how it worked and all of that. She was really curious and interested. because she was considering being a coach herself. And in the conversation, I started really feeling from her how disappointed she was that she was losing her job, that she was at this place in her life where she thought things were headed one direction and they were actually moving in an entirely different direction. And she wasn't totally prepared for it at the time, but she was also really looking at it to explore her options, to explore ideas. Well, in the course of the conversation, it came an idea of, you know what? There are thousands of people right now who are going to be without a job because the company was going out of business. And I thought, you know what? These tools, these high performance tools, are something that people could really benefit from. So, not in terms of becoming a coach at the time, but in terms of these are actual life skills. And here are people who are at a crossroads. They may not have any idea what their next steps are going to be. And as we were talking about it, I thought, how can we get this out there to people? How can we get it in a way that is really accessible for all of them? And how can we impact all of these people? There were probably 5,000, 6,000 people in this company, and here they were losing their jobs. So what we ended up doing is putting together a program where we took them through these coaching modules, because again, these were all skills that could really support them in both navigating this part of their own personal journey, but also into their next steps, no matter what they did. And whether they were people in the corporate offices or people out in the field, whether they were full-time or part-time, leadership or not, that part didn't matter. These were skills that they could all benefit from. And so we ended up taking a program that, for private coaching, I would have easily charged $10,000 for. But instead, we created a group program that was, I think we charged $97, if I remember correctly. But we were going to be doing this at mass scale, right? So that was going to be highly leveraged on our end. And for them, we'd be able to impact so many people through this. So we launched it. And I want to say we had somewhere between 50 and 100 people sign up for it. Now, mind you, remember, there were probably 5,000, 6,000 people in this company. So at the time, I was waffling between disappointed, but also really grateful that we could impact even 50 people, even 60, 70, 100, whatever it was. It was somewhere between 50 and 100. And so, I had that moment for myself of looking at it from two different angles. But here's what was really interesting. There was nothing wrong with the idea. The idea was actually a great idea, and it had within it the seed of something way bigger. It was partly the packaging of it, but it was also partly the audience and where they were at the time that didn't have it fully land. So, understandably, you've got people here that even maybe $97 was something that wasn't a priority for them at that point in time, if they were in the process of losing their job. It also was not what they were thinking at that moment. They had bigger things, maybe in some cases, just putting food on the table. So it wasn't partially a timing thing, but partially it just wasn't fully resonating. But again, there was a seed of something bigger in there. And I had an idea, and I went to some people that I used to work with in a couple of different companies, and I started to explore this idea, not with people who were losing their jobs, but exploring it as a way of how could we maybe bring this into their business? How could we support people? How could we customize it for their individual companies? What came through that is something that to this day opened up the doors and the channels for two of my largest streams of income in my business. And not only my largest streams of income, but my most leveraged, meaning I do very, very little work for the income that comes through. And if I had given up, or if I had looked at that situation as a total failure, just because we didn't impact 5,000 people at that time, then it never would have come through. It wouldn't have come to fruition and had the opportunity to create something bigger and better out of it, both for me, but also just being able to impact those thousands of people that I initially wanted to impact. I was able to impact them, but not through the path that I thought it was going to happen in. So I just want to bring that in and remind everyone here, because as we start to take actions, part of it is getting the feedback. It's getting the wisdom, even when something looks like a failure, right? Failure is not a dead end. It's evolution itself redirecting itself. This is something that Neville Goddard spoke about in his own way too. He taught that what we label as setbacks are often movement rearranging itself. That consciousness doesn't avoid contrast, it actually uses it. It uses contrast to get clarity. And this is the key part, within every experience, especially the uncomfortable ones, there's actually a gestation happening. Something is forming, something is reorganizing itself. And the seed of what's next, it often doesn't look impressive at first. It can look inconvenient, it can look messy, it can look unfinished. But that's how evolution works. Going back to Apple, Apple doesn't abandon a version because it isn't perfect. They listen to what it reveals. They let reality speak and then refine it. Now, every version of you that exists today, it began as a version 1.0. It was exploratory, it's incomplete, and it's necessary. Nothing alive skips its first draft. Launching, it's not a finish line. It's really, it's just the beginning of a conversation. It's the beginning of where do I go next? Your growth doesn't require you to have a flawless first move. It doesn't require you to be perfect. Growth happens because you have willing participation. For those of us who are trying to, or who are designed to learn by living, if you're in the human design and you have that 3 line, it's testing, it's touching, it's trying. Waiting for certainty is actually what slows wisdom down. Now, if you know nothing about human design, or if you know your human design and you don't have the 3 line, I don't think that matters, to be perfectly honest. I think we can all benefit from this mindset and this approach of putting things out into the world before we're ready, getting the feedback, refining, testing, experimenting, playing, having fun with it. More importantly than anything is to have fun with it, to not take everything so seriously. Because our wisdom, it doesn't arrive before the experience, it actually arrives through the experience. So this process of launching and evolving, it's not about rushing through things. It's actually a collaboration with life itself. Collaboration with the feedback that you're getting, and with intelligence that will only reveal itself after you take action, after movement. And remember that, you know, what looks like failure from the outside, it's often a refinement in progress. I often think here too of an example of like the caterpillar that's going into the chrysalis to evolve into the butterfly. That whole process itself is evolution. That caterpillar is going into the messy middle in there. And the process itself, while it's in the chrysalis, it's dissolving itself in its own stomach acid, basically. But something to keep in mind is the caterpillar, when it's moving into the chrysalis, you know, the caterpillars, they move low to the ground. Or, you know, they might crawl on a tree, but they can only see just so far in front of themselves. They don't have the big grand perspective. Even if they're climbing up a tree and maybe they're high up, their vision is very short-sighted. It's when they get into the chrysalis and then they emerge from it and they become the butterfly and they can fly high, that they have this massive expanded vision and they can see all around them. That's not so far off from the way Apple operates, right? The vision is the big idea, but they can only see just so far ahead of them, and they get to moving. They get to moving forward. And then as they start to evolve and release these different iterations, they start to get the bigger picture, the bigger vision. And one of the things that Steve Jobs said, one of the quotes of his that I personally quote all the time is, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can always connect them looking backwards. And that's part of having the expanded vision that comes when you evolve, when you start to let yourself take the steps forward. And you can only see those first couple of steps. But when you look in hindsight and turn around, you can see the bigger picture and how it evolved and how it happened. So that how is not something that happens before it starts to happen. It starts to evolve, but it's definitely something that you can look backwards and you can see the how, and you can really appreciate it. So a few questions here for you. Again, this would be the time to come back to this, pause it, do some journaling around this. So where in your life have you labeled something as a failure? And it might actually just be unfinished intelligence. What experiment have you learned from, regardless of the outcome? Where might life be offering you feedback instead of rejection? And what are you ready to release into motion? Knowing and trusting and having the faith that it can evolve. So we're going to move to another short break here. And again, in this conversation is, if it's reframing how you relate to progress, if you're realizing that trial and error isn't a flaw, but it's part of your intelligence, there's a place where this way of growing is not only accepted, but it's understood. That's what I created the Flourish Alchemy membership for. It's designed for women who are done trying to get it right and who are ready to grow through lived experience, through refinement, and through embodied leadership. It's where experiments are welcomed, where feedback is integrated. And what looks like failure is often just the seed of something much bigger. And we celebrate that and we encourage that. So each month, actually, in the Flourish Alchemy membership, we do one of our sessions at the beginning of the month is what's called Forecast, Focus, and Flow. It is a planning session. And in that planning session, one of the first things we do is a quick reflection. We do a quick look back, not to dwell in the past, or especially not to use the past to predict the future, but rather to gather the wisdom, to take a moment to celebrate what worked, to recognize maybe what didn't, and then to grab that fertilizer. When I say fertilizer, it's fertilizer, let's face it, is what some people can look at as a pile of poop. Other people will look at and see the fertilizer in it. Fertilizer is something that allows something to grow bigger and better. So when you look at the things that maybe didn't work the way you wanted them to, or didn't go the way you wanted them to, or maybe you're tempted to look at and see failure, you can actually grab the fertilizer from it. Because remember, something bigger and better can grow out of it. So if this speaks to you, you'll find details in the show notes. I invite you to explore it, see it. I do offer each of these sessions also as a drop-in. So you don't actually have to become a member. You can actually just join us as a drop-in. You can find out more about that. But when we return, we're going to talk about the final piece of the Apple model. And I think it's a piece that really matters a lot. because evolution doesn't just require movement forward, it also requires knowing when something has completed its role. So when we come back, we're going to talk about what happens when a version has done its job and why letting go rather than holding on is often what allows that next expansion to occur. We'll see you back.
Cut the shit. Stop struggling to feel present. Stop being taken advantage of. Express how you feel and stop making choices based on what other people think. Intuition Unleashed, a revolution in personal liberation podcast, is your go-to resource for combining guidance with mental health and spirituality and solving your questions about why you can't seem to catch a break and find your true happiness. And you can find more episodes at becknelson.com/podcast.
Tune in to the Goddess Emergent Show the first and third Wednesday of each month at 2 p.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio with Dr. Bree Gibbs, a spiritual leader, healer, and trance medium who, alongside of Goddess Bell, the creator, and other masters, will share information never before released on the planet. Embark on a spiritual pathway to address your physical health, emotional frequency, mental clarity, and spiritual well-being, all in perfect harmony. Visit drbreegibbs.com.
Are you struggling with unresolved emotions or recurring patterns? Tune into Beyond Birth Trauma, From Burden to Brilliance with me, Shannon O'Flaherty, on Transformation Talk Radio. On the second Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific Time, we'll explore your own birth experiences and consider how they might be affecting your current life patterns to start your journey towards self-discovery and healing. For more information, visit shannonbtb.com. That's shannonbtb.com.
We are all born with gifts that we are meant to use to improve the world. Join me, Vicki Todd, and Dr. Pat on Shine, Delusion, Shine, the radical art of dreaming beyond boundaries, each fourth Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio. Shine, Delusion, Shine is a springboard to believing, dreaming, and thinking beyond the ordinary and a catalyst to living a more fulfilling, destiny-driven life. For more information, visit vickiworldart.com.
Welcome back to the Flourish frequency. So if you're just tuning in, today's episode, we've been exploring growth through the lens of evolution and the Apple model. Before the break, we talked about launching and evolving, about how trial and experimentation and real world feedback, those aren't mistakes, they're actually intelligence in motion. We've explored how what sometimes looks like failure is often the seed of something bigger, and how clarity deepens after movement, not before it. And now we're going to move into the final piece of this conversation: how to recognize when a version of you has completed its role, and why letting go isn't a loss, but it's exactly the thing that allows the next evolution to emerge. With the Apple model, the stage is just as important as vision and iteration. You know, Apple is often celebrated for innovation, but what's equally powerful is what they don't cling to. Take the iPod. For years, the iPod wasn't just a product, it was an identity. You had the little white earbuds, the silhouettes dancing, the cultural moment that came with the iPod. I remember being in companies where we would get little customized iPods with our logos engraved on them. Like it was the cool thing to have the iPod. Inside Apple, the iPod was still successful when something new began to emerge. It wasn't failing. The iPod was not failing. Sales were strong and people loved it. But the context was changing. People weren't just listening to music anymore. They were texting, they were emailing, they were browsing. They were capturing their lives in real time. And Apple did something really courageous. Instead of protecting the iPod at all costs, instead of saying, but this is what we're known for, they made a bold and almost counterintuitive choice. They allowed the iPhone to absorb the iPod. They didn't erase it. They integrated it. Music didn't disappear. It evolved. And the iPod wasn't rejected. It was transcended, just like that caterpillar was transcended into the butterfly. That takes a rare kind of intelligence, because it would have been really easy to cling to the iPod, to protect the old win, to stay loyal to something that was so revolutionary. But Apple understood something essential about evolution. When the environment changes, the form must change too. The iPhone itself did not dishonor the iPod. And in fact, it honored what the iPod made possible, and then it expanded on it. And this is where it becomes personal. Because most of us have an iPod version of ourselves, a version that worked, a version that succeeded, a version that knew exactly how to operate, and a version that got you here. But that's not the version that's going to get you there next. For me, there was a season where a certain version of me knew how to perform. I knew how to produce. I knew how to stay strong. I knew how to handle things. I built, I achieved, and I held it together. But there was also a point where things weren't operating as smoothly. Not because something was wrong with me, but because I was actually outgrowing my environment. The same strategies that once created momentum, they started to become heavy. And the same things that were once empowering for me began to feel really tight. And here's the thing, the more I clung to the old environment, the worse I was performing. Something that I was really not used to. And I finally realized this version has done her job. Letting go didn't mean dishonoring that version of me. It meant integrating her wisdom and allowing something more spacious to emerge from it. Just like the iPod, that version of me didn't disappear. That version of me became part of something larger. So now I want to invite you to get curious for yourself, for the space that you are at right now. And I have several questions here. So once again, I'm going to give you an opportunity to pause this, to do some journaling for yourself, to dig deep, but most importantly, approach these questions with curiosity. I'm going to repeat this again. There's nothing wrong with you. You are not broken. There's nothing to be fixed. So don't approach this from the analytical mind that's trying to problem solve. You're a creator, and you are creating and evolving in collaboration with the creator. And in order to do that, you want to really approach this from a place of curiosity and honor the wisdom that's coming through with it. So here's some questions for you. What version of yourself has carried you through an earlier season and may have already completed its role? Where are you continuing to operate from what once worked, even though it no longer feels fully aligned? This is a big one. This is one that I've had come up for me, actually, even just last year. Where am I holding on to something out of familiarity, out of loyalty, or out of identity, rather than resonance? If I didn't make this version of myself wrong, what could I simply acknowledge as complete. What has this version of me given to me that I can integrate forward rather than just abandon it? So just like the iPod into the iPhone, how can I move it forward and not just abandon? How can I honor what's been built? Where do I sense tightness or efforting or trying to over maintain something that just no longer needs or deserves my energy? If evolution is intelligent, and it is, what might be quietly reorganizing itself in my life right now? And what would it feel like to thank a past version of myself without just rushing to replace her? So those are some questions. I've tried to ask them in different ways, different angles, different approaches. Some of those questions may resonate for you more than others. But again, I'm going to invite you to really stay with that space of curiosity and just allow the wisdom to come through you. So as we get ready to close here today, I want to bring this full circle. We started with something really simple, an update. Again, not because anything's wrong, but because evolution is built into the design. Just like with Apple, and that's built into the design. Evolution is part of just the way they work. Something that's really interesting, I have to say, is I went back and I looked at Steve Jobs. I pulled up his human design because I was curious. And sure enough, he has a 6-3 profile. And that 6 is very much about leadership and vision, big picture, leading large movements forward. And he's got that 3 that's all about the trial and error. So it makes perfect sense that Apple as a company and all of its success really was built through somebody who has that kind of energetic profile to him. But once again, we can all benefit from that whole trial and evolution, not trial and error, but trial and evolution. Remember, evolution is built into our design, whether it's your human design specifically or not. It's in all of our designs as humans. So we talked here today about vision and how you don't need to know the how before you honor what's calling you. We've talked about movement, how growth happens through the participation of life, not through the perfection of life. And we talked about releasing and how some versions of you, they just complete their role. So something more expansive can emerge. Remember that none of this is about pressuring yourself. None of this is about fixing yourself. It's about refinement. It's about discernment. And most importantly, it's about trust and faith. Version 2.026 isn't a destination that you arrive at one day. It's a process that you're in right now. And it could be 2.026 January, 2.026 February, 2.026 March. It's not just a once a year evolution, just like your iPhone or iPod or I guess not iPod, but the iPad, just like all of those. Sometimes you're just needing some updates. Sometimes you need a complete operational system upgrade. But what vision are you being invited to trust right now? Where are you ready to move without needing the full plan? And what version of you might be ready to be honored and released? Remember, evolution happens in layers. So if you're ready to consciously upgrade your operating system to evolve you, version 2.026, I'd love to invite you again into the Flourish Alchemy membership. It's a place where we don't just talk about evolution. We actually work every single month about and work towards embodying it. You'll find the details in the show notes below. But until next time, I'm going to invite you to trust your update and trust your evolution and know that you are right on time. Until next time, keep flourishing. Thank you for tuning in to the Flourish Frequency Show with me, Beth Larsen. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and are leaving with a heart full of inspiration and a mind buzzing with the possibilities of more. Tune in every third Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio for more frequency boosting conversations. And if you want more help getting into your Flourish flow and stepping into the possibilities of more, you can find me at BethLarsenCoaching.com. That's BethLarsenCoaching.com, Larsen with an E.